In the autumn of 1457, in a small mountain town in eastern Korea, two men's lives converged for exactly 4 months, and the way one of them ended changed how the other one would be remembered for the next 569 years. The first man was 16 years old. He had been a king, the grandson of Sejong the Great, the most revered ruler in Korean history. 3 years before this autumn, he had sat on the throne of Joseon. Now he was a prisoner in a converted government guest house, watched at all hours, waiting for the order he knew was coming. The second man was 53. He was not a king. He was not a noble. He was the head clerk of the local county, a hereditary position that his father and his grandfather had also held. He ran the local administration. He knew everyone in the town. And on a night in late October, after the boy he had been guarding for 4 months was dead, he made a decision that by every rational calculation should have destroyed his entire family. In February 2026, a Korean film called The King's Warden, Wangwa Sanun Namja in Korean, opened in theaters. By April, it had been seen by over 16 million viewers. The second most watched Korean film in history. A movie about a 15th century county clerk and a murdered teenager, drawing more viewers than every superhero film of the year combined. Why? This is the verified history of King Danjong and the village headman who buried him. Where the official records speak, we will follow the records. Where they fall silent, we will say so. And we will try to understand why a story about two men in a mountain town 5 centuries ago is still asking modern Korea a question it has never finished answering. He was born Yi Hong-wee on the 23rd of July, 1441, in the inner palace of Hansong, the capital of the Joseon Dynasty. At the moment of his birth, the line of succession was clear and stable. His grandfather was King Sejong, then in his 23rd year on the throne. His father was Crown Prince Moonjong, a brilliant but physically frail scholar who had spent his life preparing to inherit. Yi Hong-wee himself, as the eldest son of the eldest son, was the next generation. 3 reigns, neatly aligned, stretching forward into a future that would last for centuries. 3 days after his birth, his mother died. Crown Princess Heung-do did not survive the complications of childbirth. The annals do not describe her final hours in detail. What they record is that on the 3rd day, she was gone, and the infant prince was placed in the care of court nurses and palace ladies who would raise him in the women's quarters of the palace. He never knew her. For the first 9 years of his life, this absence did not seem to matter. Sejong was alive. The kingdom was at peace. Yi Hong-wee grew up among tutors and minor princes, learning the Confucian classics, court rituals, the proper conduct of a future king. Then, in February of 1450, Sejong died. His father Moonjong took the throne. The annals of King Moonjong record that he had been ill for years before his coronation, and the illness did not relent. He ruled for 2 years, 3 months, and 6 days. Then he died as well. The annals preserve a striking passage from Moonjong's final months. Knowing he was dying, he summoned his most trusted ministers, Kim Jong-se, Hwang Bo-in, and others, and made them swear an oath. Not to govern wisely, not to defend the kingdom from invaders. Something simpler and more desperate. Protect my son. They swore. In May of 1452, Yi Hong-wee was crowned the 6th king of Joseon. He took the title that history would eventually use for him, Danjong, meaning the upright and pure. He was 11 years old. By the Korean calendar, 12. He had no mother. He had no father. He had no grandfather. He had a kingdom that had been governed by his family for generations. And in a wing of the palace that he was about to learn very well, his uncle was waiting. In the same year that Yi Hong-wee was born, the summer of 1441, a man named Heung-do was nearing his 40th birthday in a place no one in the capital had reason to think about. He lived in Yeongwol, a county in Gangwon Province, deep in the mountains east of the capital, on the upper reaches of the Donggong River. The journey from Hansong to Yeongwol took the better part of a week on the roads of 15th century Joseon. It was not far in modern terms. It was very far in 1441. What we know about Heung-do comes from a combination of family genealogies, the Yeongwol clan records, and references that appear decades after his death in the annals of later kings. The picture that emerges is consistent. He had been born around 1404. His family had lived in Yeongwol for generations. His grandfather, Se-won, had been the Hojong of the county, the head of the local administrative clerks. His father, Hanja, had inherited the same position. By the time Heung-do came of age, the role had effectively become hereditary in his family. He too became the Hojong of Yeongwol. It is important to be precise about what this position meant. Hojong was not a low position, despite what some popular accounts have suggested. The Haeongmi, the local administrative class, were a distinct middle stratum in Joseon society, separate from both the Yeongbon aristocracy and the common peasantry. They were literate by necessity. They handled the county's tax collection, the household census, the labor conscription rolls, the judicial paperwork, the maintenance of local government records. The Hojong sat at the top of this hierarchy, directly under the centrally appointed county magistrate. In the structure of Joseon, the Hojong of a small mountain county was not a powerful figure on the national stage. He could not become a high minister. He could not pass the civil service exam and join the central court. But within his own county, he was, in functional terms, the senior local official. He knew everyone. He kept the records. He carried the weight of the local government. For decades, Heung-do did this work. He buried his parents. He raised 3 sons, Ho-hyung, Gwang-soon, and Sung-hyung, who would in time inherit aspects of his role. He grew old in Yeongwol. The annals do not record a single thing he did during these decades, because nothing he did was important to the central court. In the summer of 1457, the night was October 10th, 1453, the 53rd year of the 60-year cycle, the year known to the Korean calendar as Gyeyu. What happened that night is recorded in the annals as the Gyeyu Jungnan, the Gyeyu political upheaval. The English translation is too gentle. It was a coup, executed in a single night, with deliberate, calculated violence. The man who led it was EU, known to history by his princely title, Suyang Daegun, the Grand Prince Suyang. He was Sejong's second son, Moonjong's younger brother, Danjong's uncle, and by every account that survives, he was nothing like his father or his elder brother. Where Moonjong had been gentle and scholarly, Suyang was ruthless and politically gifted. Where the Confucian rules of succession placed him permanently second, his ambition placed him first. He had spent the year and a half since Danjong's coronation preparing. He found 2 strategists, Han Myung-hwae and Kwon Ram, whose talent for political maneuvering was matched only by their willingness to act. He cultivated military officers. He identified the men who stood between him and the throne. The most important of these was Kim Jong-soo. Kim Jong-soo was the senior figure of the Moonjong faction. He was old, formidable, and respected throughout the kingdom. For more than a decade, he had served on the northern frontier, leading the campaigns that secured the 6 garrisons along the Tumun River. He had taken Moonjong's deathbed oath to protect Danjong with absolute seriousness. On the night of October 10th, Suyang and his men went to Kim Jong-soo's house. The annals describe what happened in formal language. Suyang arrived on a pretext, a private matter, a conversation. The historical accounts vary on the precise sequence of what followed. What is consistent is that Kim Jong-soo, the old general who had defended the northern border for decades, was struck down in his own home that night. Most accounts describe an iron mace as the weapon. He did not survive. While Kim Jong-soo lay dying, Suyang's forces moved through the capital. Hwang Bo-in, another senior minister of the Moonjong faction, was killed. So were his sons. Other ministers loyal to Danjong were dragged from their homes and executed in the dark. By dawn, the men who had sworn to protect the boy king had been almost entirely eliminated. Danjong was 12 years old. The annals do not tell us where he was during the killings, or what he saw, or what he understood about what was happening. He was, by all accounts, in the palace. There was no one left to protect him. By morning, Sejong held the title of Chief State Counselor, the highest formal position below the king. The boy king was still on the throne in name, but every decree that left the palace from that day forward had been written by Sejong's faction. Every appointment, every policy, every decision. For 2 years, this was how Joseon was governed. Then, in 1455, Sejong decided that even the pretense was no longer necessary. Danjong was forced to abdicate. Sejong ascended the throne and took the name Sejong. In Yeongwol, the news arrived later and incompletely. The central court did not consult the local Heung-mi about its succession crises. The Hojang of a small mountain county did not receive briefings on the Gyeyu Jungnan. Heung-do, in 1453, would have learned about the killings the way most Joseon commoners learned about national events, through royal proclamations posted at the magistrate's office, through travelers passing through the slow, distorted ripples of court news as it moved outward from the capital. We do not know what he thought about it. The annals do not record the reactions of provincial clerks to political events in Hansong. We know that the Heung-mi class, in general, were thoroughly committed to the Confucian moral framework that the central scholars had built. We know that the Sejong coup violated that framework in the most direct possible way. An uncle had used violence to take the throne from his nephew. We know that this was the kind of act that in Confucian terms was not just a political crime, but a moral one. But we do not know what Heung-do said about it, or to whom, or whether he said anything at all. He was a county clerk. He had a household to run. He had 3 sons. The political crises of the capital were not, in any direct sense, his to solve. What he could not have known was that the Sejong court, having taken the throne, would now begin the slow work of erasing its predecessor. In the summer of 1456, 6 men in the central court attempted to assassinate Sejong and restore Danjong. They were the Sayok-shin, the 6 martyred ministers. Their plan failed. They were betrayed by one of their own associates. They were tortured, executed, and their families were destroyed under the principle of Yunjua, the Joseon law of guilt by association that punished entire bloodlines for the acts of one member. Wives and daughters were made household slaves. Sons were executed. Brothers were exiled. The message Sejong intended was unmistakable. The cost of standing for Danjong was not your own life, it was everyone you had ever loved. News of the Sayok-shin executions reached Yeongwol the way news always reached Yeongwol, eventually through the regular channels. And in the summer of 1457, a different kind of news arrived. A royal proclamation sent to the local magistrate with instructions for the head clerk and the local infrastructure. The deposed king, now demoted to the title of Lord of Joseon, would be exiled to their county. They were to receive him, contain him, and watch him. Danjong left the palace at Changdeok-gung on the 22nd day of the 6th month, 1457, by the lunar calendar. He was 16 years old. The escort was led by an officer named Yu-so, with a party of approximately 50 men. The route went south through Gwangju, then east through Yuju, Wonju, and Juchun. The journey took about a week. The place chosen for his exile was called Cheongwon-po, a small finger of land in Yeongwol County on the upper reaches of the Donggang River. If you visit Cheongwon-po today, you can still see why this site was chosen. The geography is its own prison. The land is surrounded on three sides by the river, deep, swift, and wide enough that no one is going to swim it. On the fourth side, a sheer cliff rises directly upward, covered in pine forest. There is one way in, a small ferry across the water. There are no walls, because there do not need to be. Danjong arrived in late June by the lunar calendar. He came with a small retinue stripped down from his palace household. Court attendants, servants, a handful of guards assigned by the central court to watch him. The local administration was responsible for his containment. This meant the county magistrate, who was a centrally appointed official, and beneath him, the Hojong, Heung-do. We do not know what their first meeting was like. We do not know if there was a first meeting in any formal sense. The annals do not tell us. The earliest detailed records of the Yongwall period come from family traditions compiled centuries later, and they describe the relationship between the Hojong and the deposed king in a romantic register that we cannot verify. What we know is structural. Heung-do was the senior local official charged with the practical operations of Danjong's exile. He kept the records. He was responsible for the household supplies, the boundaries of the containment, the daily logistics of holding a former king in a guest house on a peninsula. He would have been, in functional terms, the most regular official presence in Danjong's daily life during the 4 months of the exile. For a few weeks in the summer, the geography of Cheongyangpo did its work. Danjong was watched. The river kept him in. The local people, who knew exactly who their guest was, kept their distance. Then the river did something else. In the late summer of 1457, the Dongdong flooded. The waters rose high enough to make Cheongyangpo uninhabitable. Danjong was relocated to a building called Gwanpung-hun, a local government guest house on higher ground in the town of Yongwall itself. The records are clear on this point, and it matters. The place where Danjong actually died was Gwanpung-hun, not Cheongyangpo. The film The King's Warden, like many later popular treatments, blurs this distinction. The history does not. In Gwanpung-hun, in the autumn of 1457, the 4 months ended. On the 24th day of the 10th lunar month, 1457, the central court's decision arrived in Yongwol. A messenger had come from Hansong. The annals identify the official as Wang Bongyun, the Gumbu Doyong, an officer of the state tribunal. He carried orders for the death of the deposed king. The exact form of those orders is one of the points where the historical sources fall apart in interesting ways. The official annals of King Sejong, written under the regime that ordered the execution, contain a single brief line. The deposed king, hearing of the executions of 2 relatives, Gumsung Daegun and his father-in-law Song Hyun-soo, hanged himself. He was buried with proper rites. This is the official record. Almost no modern historian believes it. The annals of King Sukjong, written more than 2 centuries later, when the Joseon court was finally willing to look at what had happened, tell a different story. According to this version, Wang Bongyun arrived in Yongwol carrying the death order, but found himself unable to deliver it. An unnamed court attendant, a Tongan, volunteered to do what the senior officer would not. The attendant tied a cord to a bowstring, routed it through a window behind Danjong, and strangled him. There is a third version, found in popular tradition and folk memory, rather than in the annals. In this version, the death was administered through sayak, the royal poison reserved for those who could not be publicly executed. The poison cup is the image that has dominated Korean dramatizations for centuries. It is also, by all rigorous historical analysis, not in any official record. The poison version appears to be a later folk reconstruction, possibly influenced by the famous Sejong poem attributed to Wang Bongyun that mourns his role in the journey. What is not in dispute across all the accounts is that on that day, in a guest house in a mountain town, a 16-year-old boy died on the orders of his uncle. What happened next is where Heung-do enters the historical record permanently. The Central Court's decree, according to the standard account, included an instruction about the body. It was not to be given a proper royal funeral. The exact wording of the prohibition has been disputed and embellished over centuries. Popular accounts describe a threat of execution and family destruction for anyone who buried the body, but no such formal decree appears in the annals. What is documented is the political reality. The body of a deposed king, killed by the new regime, was not safe to bury. For the local people of Yongwol, this presented an impossible situation. In Confucian culture, the proper burial of the dead was not optional. It was the moral foundation of the entire society. To leave a body unburied was a cosmic wrong, but to bury this body, in this political moment, was to risk everything. The local tradition and the family genealogy of the Yongwol clan agree on what happened the next day. On the 25th day of the 10th month, 1457, Heung-do gathered his sons and a small group of local people. They retrieved Danjong's body. They carried it about 2 kilometers north of the town, to a hillside called Dongulji. They buried it. The popular image of Heung-do as a single man acting alone in the dark is romantic and, by the unanimous reading of the historical sources, embellished. The actual burial appears to have involved his sons and possibly other local officials and commoners. This was a small, careful, locally organized act, not a solitary heroic dash. But that does not diminish what was risked. To touch the body of a king the central regime was trying to erase was, for any local official who participated, a political act of profound courage. What happened to Heung-do after the burial is the point where the verifiable history thins out and family tradition takes over. The Central Court does not appear to have moved against him. There is no record of arrest, no record of punishment, no record of the family being destroyed under Yeonjwa. Family tradition, recorded centuries later in a document called the Chungui Gong Silgi, holds that Heung-do fled to Donghaksa Temple in Gongju with his sons, shaved his head, and posed as a Buddhist monk to perform Danjong's 3-year mourning, then settled in the deep mountains of Moonjeong as a farmer, returning to Yongwol near the end of his life. He is recorded in the family genealogy as having died on the 26th day of the 2nd month, 1474. None of this later biography is in the annals. The annals lose interest in him after the burial. He had performed the act that history would eventually require him to be remembered for, and then he became for a long time what he had always been before, a county clerk in a small town that the Central Court did not need to think about. For more than 2 centuries after the burial, the Joseon court did not officially acknowledge what Heung-do had done. This was not because the act was unknown. The first reference to Heung-do in the annals appears in 1516 in the reign of King Danjong, 59 years after the burial. By then, the political environment had shifted enough that a small mention was possible. In 1585, under King Sunjo, a descendant named Han-rei was granted a tax exemption and assigned as the official guardian of the tomb of the man then still officially known as the Lord of Nosan. The family, in other words, had not been destroyed. They had survived. They had even, quietly, been recognized. But the larger restoration, the formal acknowledgement that what Sejong had done was wrong, and that the boy who had died in Yongwol had been the rightful king, would not come until 1698. King Sukjong, the 19th king of Joseon, was the one who issued the decree. The dead king was restored to his royal title and given the posthumous name Danjong, meaning the upright and pure. His reign was officially recognized in the chronicles. The gravesite at Dong-lji was redesignated as a royal tomb. It was given the name Jongnong, meaning the honorable mausoleum. In the same era of restoration, Heung-do received his first official posthumous appointment, Gongjo Jwarang, a junior court rank. The recognition was modest, but it was the beginning. In 1726, King Yeongjo promoted him further and ordered the construction of a jeongnyo, a memorial gate honoring his loyalty at Yeongwol. In 1758, Heung-do did something more remarkable. He personally composed a funerary text for Heung-do, promoted him posthumously to the junior second rank, and ordered him enshrined at Changjulsa, the shrine in Yeongwol that already housed the 6 martyred ministers. The county clerk from the mountains was now formally recognized alongside the scholar officials of the central court. The Yongban who had died for Danjong and the Hyangni who had buried him would receive offerings from the same altars. In 1876, King Gojong granted him the posthumous title Chongui, the loyal and resolute. This is what Korean cultural memory has been doing, slowly, over more than 3 centuries, adjusting the moral ledger, acknowledging one decree at a time that a wrong committed in 1457 still required an answer, that a man who had performed a small, locally organized act in a mountain town deserved a place beside the famous men of the capital. And then, in 2026, the same story arrived in modern Korea in a form that drew over 16 million viewers. The film The King's Warden, Wangwa Sonen Namja, opened in Korean theaters on the 4th of February, 2026, the Lunar New Year holiday weekend. It was directed by Jang Hung-jun. The role of Heung-do was played by Yoo Hae-jin, one of the most respected character actors in Korean cinema. The role of Danjong was played by Bak Ji-hoon. The film centered on the 4 months that Heung-do and Danjong shared in Yeongwol, and on the burial that followed. By April, the film had been seen by over 16.2 million viewers, the second most watched Korean film of all time, behind only the 2014 epic about Admiral Yi Sun-shin. By box office revenue, it was the highest-grossing Korean film ever made. The film took some liberties with the historical record, as films do. It compressed events, invented dialogue, simplified the political background. The director publicly acknowledged that he had merged the unnamed court attendant, who is recorded in the Sukjong annals as the actual executioner, with the figure of Heung-do for narrative reasons. The historical Heung-do did not assist in the death. He buried the body the next day. But the film captured something the historical sources also preserve. The shape of the story is real. A teenage king, abandoned by every institution that should have protected him, dying in a guest house in a mountain town. A local official, with no political reason to act, doing the one thing the central regime had forbidden. A small group of people in a small town, deciding that the rules being imposed from the capital were wrong, and doing what their own moral framework required. That 16 million modern Koreans paid to watch this story unfold across 2 hours of screen time is itself, in a way, the final chapter. The Korean cultural concept that Heung-do is associated with is called yui, sometimes translated as righteousness, sometimes as moral duty, but neither English word fully carries the weight. Yui is the recognition that some acts are required regardless of cost, that the difference between knowing the right thing and doing it is itself a form of moral failure, that a person becomes fully a person, in some sense, only by their willingness to act against their own interest when the moment demands it. This concept is not unique to Korea. Every culture that has thought seriously about ethics has some version of it. But in the Confucian moral architecture of Joseon, yui had a particular structure. It was not a feeling, it was an obligation. And on a hillside in Yeongwol, in the autumn of 1457, a hereditary county clerk acted on it with the help of his sons. Danjong died at 16 in a guest house he was not allowed to leave. Heung-do lived to the age of 70 and died in his bed. That's why we tell this story, recorded in his family's genealogy, his line continuing through his 3 sons and their descendants. The boy king who lost everything is buried at Jeonnam. The Hojong who buried him is enshrined at Changjulsa, beside the famous men of the central court. 569 years have passed. The question they answered, in their small way, is still being asked. That is why 16 million modern Koreans went to see the film, and that is why we still tell the story.